Stephen Colbert called it truthiness, the idea that truth may not always be related to facts, especially when public figures speak. Now we have Trumpiness, if you want to call it that, the president saying things that are demonstrably untrue and then never backing down when confronted with the facts. So, is truth overrated? Is lying the new American way? Well, the Marist Poll has been in the field asking questions, and we've got answers. This time on Poll Hub, truth versus fiction. Let's get started. And hi, everybody. This is Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, director of Marist College Institute for Public Opinion. And joining us, as always, is
Barbara Carvalho. I'm the director of Marist Poll here at Marist College in lovely Poughkeepsie, New York.
I gave you a head fake there, Lee. I was looking at her when it was your cue to go, and that's why.
Well, part of the reason is people don't realize we're in different seats today also.
We are.
So we had to really improv that one.
We have changed our seating positions, so if this episode goes poorly, we're going to blame the seating positions, right. But let's hope it doesn't. And all of those things were factual, but were they truthful, what I just said? That's the topic here. And the reason is that we have a president that people in both parties on all sides can acknowledge. In fact, his biggest supporters will acknowledge he doesn't always tell the truth if you define the truth as speaking in facts. But facts and truth seem to have kind of separated in this era, and for people who live in a fact-based world, it can be kind of challenging to understand how we got to this place. You guys have been out in the field. You've asked a lot of questions about this, about truth. Is lying the new American way, as we said at the beginning? Is it, Barbara? Is lying the new American way?
Well, you know what? We collaborated with a new show on PBS, sponsored by WGBH and PBS, called The Third Rail with OZY. And their question to us was, is truth overrated? And is lying now the new American way? And so we posed that to Americans nationwide and found out that no, most Americans do not agree with that. 76% actually said that they disagreed with that statement, and only 18% said that they agreed with it. But we went a little farther and asked Americans, do they think that they are lied to? And interestingly, 2/3 of Americans say they think people are lying to them at least some of the time. And this is actually up from 45% when USA Today asked this question 30 years ago.
So that's over 30 years, but I think a lot of people think that things have gotten worse, really a lot worse in the last couple of years. Although, Stephen Colbert was talking about truthiness before Donald Trump even existed.
Oh, exactly. And I think that's a good point. I don't think it's just about the president. I think this has been something that's going on for a while. I think it's caused a good amount of our polarization. In other words, people, arguing truth and facts when in fact it may be actually opinion and perceptions. And so I think part of that and discussion and definition in our lexicon has certainly made things much more polarized.
Well, what was it that Senator Moynihan used to say, that everybody's entitled to their opinion, but not necessarily to the facts of an
their
issue.
Own facts.
But as the senior member of this trio, I want to go back even further than you're going back to Colbert and truthiness. I recall in my formative years, before Vietnam, before Watergate, the notion that presidents lied to you was heresy. In other words, the notion that we could even be having this discussion right now, and we'll be talking obviously about Donald Trump to some degree. I mean, that just would not have occurred as a realistic topic. So I find it interesting when Barb goes back to 30 years ago. Unfortunately, that still doesn't put me into my formative years exactly. But if we went back a little bit further than that, we'd be going back to a time where there was a trust in the veracity of what people were saying, and now the polls are not picking up on that.
Well, that's a good point, Lee, because what we also found was that when we asked Americans specifically about President Trump and whether they think he's more likely to tell the truth or more likely to lie, a majority of Americans, 55%, actually said they think he's someone who's more likely to lie than tell the truth. 35% believe in his truthiness most of the time, and that really corresponds with the number of people
who are approving of the job he's doing as president.
So I guess what's interesting to me here is that we have a case of a president who demonstrably tells factual inaccuracies and even acknowledges that he tells demonstrable factual inaccuracies, and in fact has indicated that that's part of being a successful real estate developer, is to gild the lily, right? To put lipstick on a pig, right? That's what you do. Is that because he is president? Does that somehow make it better or worse to people? Or is it, do they accept him as he is, and they accept that politicians, as a rule, don't really tell the truth anyway?
We, as pollsters, would suggest, and as political scientists, would suggest that makes it a whole lot worse, because the fabric of democracy is getting a little tethered right now, and that's something that concerns, I think, people who have firm beliefs in the checks and balances and the separation of powers and all those things that we grew up with from our civics classes, holding near and dear, and I think we've gotten away from that.
But again, if you had asked people 10 years ago, maybe you did, do politicians routinely lie? I mean, come on, 90% of people are going to go, yeah, they routinely lie about
also,
things.
Jay, I mean, you've covered politicians for a long time. Do you see this as different?
Yeah. So I would, if someone were to ask me 20 years ago when I was covering politics, early in my career, that do politicians lie routinely? I had covered enough politicians early in my career to say, yes, they routinely lie. If lying is defined as, do they always stick to exactly the facts? No. I mean, and that's life. We all tell little lies all the time, right? That's part of, maybe not all of us, but I do. I mean, that's part of living. It's part of getting along with people.
No, and I think there are different types of lies.
Right. This does seem different in that the kinds of lies that politicians have historically told are the ones more about themselves, or maybe about their policies.
Or their resume.
Or their resumes. There's plenty of that, yeah. Or maybe about their policies and how the policies are working, or how they're affecting people. My economic policy is bringing prosperity to everyone. Well, not exactly. The unemployment rate's up 3%. Yes, but that's, whatever, that kind of thing. But this does seem different in that every single day, virtually every single day, there are factual inaccuracies that the president
but there's two sides to this too.
They're not related to his policies. They're not related to him. They're, the sky is not blue, it's green. Yeah. No, it's not green, it's blue.
And when we had the credibility gap during Vietnam, this brings it to a whole new level. And not only that, and we talk about, there's been some articles in the New York Times and Washington Post recently categorizing some of the way Donald Trump approaches this. But one thing that I think really bears mentioning is that he's also coined the phrase fake polls and fake news, which may or may not be fake, but it's a way he is aggressively pushing back on political information that he doesn't like. So he's labeling things as dishonest or not true because politically he's not loving it. But the articles in the Washington Post and the New York Times, I thought were really fascinating. Recently.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite example that they use?
It starts out with the birther issue. I mean, that's what brought Donald Trump to the political table. And I think there's so many categories. He repeats things. He flip-flops on things. He talks about things that have occurred before, but they necessarily didn't. There's simple things. On repetition. So he said that China had stopped manipulating its currency. So get the shifting, watch the shifting bouncing ball here. So when did they stop? In April 21st? Well, it was from the time I took office. April 29th, it was during the election. April 30th, next day, as soon as I got elected. May 1st, next day. Since I started running, May 4th, since I've been talking about currency manipulation. So you have, within the space of 2 weeks, 5 different explanations. Explanation's probably a kind word for that, of sort of like shifting the reality to match what is very loosely phrased as something that he thinks is real.
Well, but I think Jay's pointed out that, politicians have often kind of changed a context or kind of worked things to their advantage. I think one of the interesting things that we found in this poll, if we want to look at maybe some of the implications of this, is we did ask people how they thought world leaders should respond to the president in terms of either what he says or should they really just wait to see what he does. And I think that what was very, very interesting in this is that only 35% of Americans said that they should listen to what Trump says, and nearly half said just hold on and wait to see what he does, meaning his actions speak louder than words. And I think that is a shift, at least in terms of our foreign policy and our relationships that we have with other countries.
But again, when we come back to what people that you poll think about this, it strikes me that there has always been this position that politicians lie, and that even people who don't like Donald Trump and don't support Donald Trump, and they may think this is a more egregious example of that, kind of check the box that, he's actually just a typical politician. He just lies more egregiously than they do, but he still lies. Is this really a fundamental shift, or is it a shift in degree?
Well, I think we have to talk about social media and all this, because a lot of this originates from his tweeting at all times of the day, all times of night, and some of that has to do with just the mood of the day and when he wakes up and what he's thinking, and that's where the distortion can start.
Right. So is that a case of most politicians would do this same thing if they didn't have a filter, and this is the first guy who doesn't listen to his staff and says, I'm going to do what I want? No other president has done. No other president has picked up the phone. Remember, Barack Obama could barely keep his own BlackBerry. They wanted to take it away from him. This is a guy who's got a probably unprotected Android cell phone, and he's tweeting away, day and night.
He's fixated also with cable TV. So he starts off with Fox and Friends, and that's a source of information for him, and he's not filtering out the real from the fake. So therefore, what he's communicating, what he's passing on, understandably perhaps, also makes that
So wait a second. Are you saying this is an issue of the president, or is this now an issue about what our media and our means of communication is right now?
Maybe it's both.
Is there no filter? Because in the past, we have had the media filtering our news. We don't really have that now. I mean,
or you had a White House chief of staff filtering the president. Or the communications department. That too.
Yeah. But if we move away from politicians for just a second, I mean, even thinking we had these, disastrous weather events in the last couple of weeks. Certainly there has been a debate about climate change. I think that to kind of pull that apart, it would be helpful to look at and separate fact from opinion and perceptions, because science does tell us very specific things. And the nice thing about science is, even though it does take a long time, we can it tells us things through experimentation, through observation, and that observation is done through replication, which means that it's not just my own eyes that have to see it, but it has to be other scientists over and over and over again.
Barbara's intimating here that the world may not, in fact, be flat.
I think that what you're suggesting is that in your next poll, you ought to be asking people about their belief in science. How's that?
Yeah. That may be the bottom line here.
But I think there's a new episode of Poll Up down the line that we'll get to about the belief and the trust in science as opposed to what? As opposed to the fictions that we hear.
Well, or opinion. Let's be kinder.
Science versus opinion. There you go. Well, new episode coming up. Stay tuned. One of the things that has always made me amazed about working with you guys over all the years as a reporter was how you actually do the polls. And I don't mean the statistics or running computer programs or stuff. You have students picking up the phone and calling people and getting them to talk and answer questions, which if it was me on the other end of the line, I'd probably hang up. Like a telemarketer. It's like I do to telemarketers.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah, I might. Anyway, but we have an expert on how you guys get this done joining us today.
Ooh, I'm an expert.
You are. Introduce yourself.
Great. I'm Daniela Charter, and I am the director of the Survey Center and Education Services.
So at a base level, you are the one, or in charge of getting these students in the position where they're actually picking up phones or headsets and asking people questions. That has got to be a pretty tough journey to get, a freshman or a sophomore college student to that point. How do you do that? How do you start?
Well, I would say yes and no to that. We offer so many great opportunities here that I think it's fairly easy to get them in the door. A lot of students come to Marist knowing a lot about the Marist Poll. I've had students reach out to me before they even get here, very excited to work for the Marist Poll. So once we get them in the door, or even just talk to them via email or at the job fair, and we tell them a little bit about what we do, they usually get pretty excited about it. Now, obviously, once they, see a little bit more about having to be on the phones, fears will come up, and they worry about, will people hang up on them? Will people yell at them? And some students even realize it's not for them.
Yeah, and
But-
what's the
yes.
process? So I am a freshman. I come to you. I'd like to do the Marist Poll. How do I find out what I need to do?
Again, it depends. If they're talking to me in person, I'll tell them about it. If they send me an email, I send them all of the information, including from the very start how to begin our online information session, which is offered through the online platform at Marist, iLearn. And it's a great place to start because they get to see what we're all about.
Yeah, the Survey Center is a little different here at Marist College than it is, perhaps a commercial phone center. So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the goals in bringing students on besides just having a good job on campus?
Absolutely. So yes, of course, students are looking to make some money. But as I mentioned before, there's a lot of great opportunities beyond that.
What are some of the things that they end up doing?
So
And learning.
So yeah, they're definitely learning a great deal about polling in general, from how to collect data to where it goes beyond that, what it's used for. It's obviously very exciting for them to see their work being broadcast all, everywhere.
How many students do we have in a semester?
Nearly 300 each semester.
And they're all poli-sci students, right?
Absolutely not. No, they're from all backgrounds and different majors. And then beyond polling and knowing how to collect data and conduct surveys using standardized interviewing, they also get to work on their communication skills. They learn a lot about people. I don't know if it's always what they want to learn about
So
people.
do people all yell at them and hang up on them?
Not at all. And I always explain to them during training that, yes, they will run into it from time to time, but it actually doesn't happen as much as some people would think. People may decline politely, and we give them all the tools to then talk them into staying on the phone with them. One thing is often they talk about their student status and that it is an educational program. And a lot of people like to hear that and will stay on the phone just to be part of that.
So we always think of numbers when we look at polling. So this proportion says this and that percent says that. But you're actually talking to real people all around the country, and the students you're working with are talking to real people. Is there a story, or is there something that comes to mind about how you learned something or how you found out about a person and the real story behind some of the numbers?
I had the, I will say, privilege in the end to actually meet one of our callers. And it was actually because she was in distress. And the interviewer that was on the phone was smart enough to know to get a supervisor. And we realized that she needed some help. And we called 911, and long story short, we ended up essentially saving her life. And after this happened, we also had the opportunity to actually meet her in real life, and she was a wonderful woman and had some really great opinions that she
Choice
had.
words, as I recall.
Yes, I think you were interviewing her about Mayor Bloomberg of New York City at the time, and she wasn't a fan.
Yeah, and her only regret was that she didn't get to express those opinions in the phone call because at the time she was
now you
in
talked
need of
a little.
assistance.
You talked a little bit about the fact that the student interviewer was smart enough, but it's not just smarts. I think it's part of the training as well.
It certainly is. It certainly is, and it's goes back to kind of a golden rule that no matter what is happening on the other end of the call, we never hang up on a respondent. So even if they're not being very friendly or saying things that the student doesn't want to hear, they are trained to put their hand up and someone will come over and take the call.
And that's
from
part
them.
of the ethics training and human subjects research that we take very seriously here.
Yeah, and Danielle, you talked about, in your title, it's educational services. So I walk by the phoning room and I see something going on that from a faculty member standpoint, pedagogically speaking, if I can say that.
Ooh, that's a big word.
I was asking for trouble there.
Yep.
Something that really great that goes on, and that is that you have veteran interviewers, juniors and seniors, who do the evaluation of the rookies and the newbies, the freshmen and the sophomore, and they're providing feedback, which I think is just something that they will have to be able to do in whatever their career ends up, the ability to provide feedback and the ability to receive it. So
Absolutely.
jump in on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I had mentioned that we do an information session. From there, students come in and do an on-site training, some hands-on work, review of what they learned in the information session, and then we do, from there, put them on the phones. But the educational part of it does not end there. We have student supervisors that every night are available to provide feedback. They're monitoring the students.
And they're in teams, right?
And they're in teams. And they're actually, those student supervisors are referred to as coaches. So they have a team. We have a coach for each team or multiple coaches for each team. And one of the greatest parts about that is the students that are on the phones and getting the feedback, they can look forward to, if they do great, becoming one of those coaches. And when I interview for that position, it's almost always one of the things I hear when I ask them, why do you want to be a coach? They say, because it was so valuable to me as an interviewer.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 meaning this is just a bunch of students making a bunch of phone calls, and 10 meaning this is a professional, serious undertaking where we're gathering accurate information. 1 to 10, what are you looking at?
You pay her paycheck.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. See, I think I need you to repeat that one for me, Lee, if you don't mind.
It's a 10. I'll just
you know
I'll
how
just
those
answer
scales
for you.
go, those 1 to 10 scales.
They're very misleading. It's a 10. Danielle, thanks for coming in. This has been great because I do think that as Barbara said, polls are seen as a bunch of numbers and figures and news reports about those numbers and figures. But the number of people that are behind this poll, which has been so accurate for so long, and has such a good reputation, is really all of these students that are in that room.
Absolutely.
And we will be hearing from them in future episodes. We're going to hear from students too, because I think that's one of the underlying stories that's so cool about what is done here at the Marist Poll. So thanks for coming in. What do you think of your own voice in the headphones? It always freaks people out. You okay with that?
I was okay with it. I'm not always thrilled to hear my own voice, but
Okay,
getting used to it.
Dude, we got to keep her out of the radio station. She'll go be a DJ, and you're going to lose her. So I don't want that to happen.
And that'll wrap up this edition of Poll Hub.
Yes, and please send your questions to us. We want to hear from you, so send them to pollhub@marist.edu.
And check out Poll Hub on social media, at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook. We're on Snapchat and Instagram. And please don't forget to subscribe. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, there is a subscribe button. Hit it, and that way you'll keep in touch and know every time we post a new episode, which is just about every single week because we are polling just about always here at the Marist Poll. Have a good week, everybody.